Friday night, the house was finally quiet. Kids were with my sister for the weekend, giving us some rare time alone. I set up the whole night, ordered takeout from Jenna's favorite place, put on a playlist we used to love, thinking we could use a little reset. She'd been distant lately, but I thought a good night together would help. Classic move, right? Try to fix something without really knowing what's wrong. Around 8, Jenna was supposed to be on her way home. Instead, my phone buzzed, and there it was, a message from her. Hey, don't wait up. Spending the night with a celebrity. I actually laughed at first, thinking it was a joke. But then it sank in the way she said it, like it was some casual update. Don't wait up? My stomach dropped. What kind of wife says that to her husband? I sat there, rereading that line until my eyes blurred, trying to make sense of it. Spending the night with a celebrity? What was she even talking about? Without thinking, I replied, who's this celebrity? No answer. 5 minutes passed, then 10. I called her and it went straight to voicemail. Now I was pacing. Something didn't sit right. Jenna had been acting strange for weeks, disappearing for hours, talking about meetings that lasted until midnight, barely looking me in the eye. And now this, I had half a mind to start calling her friends. But then I thought, what's the point? I needed to know from her. I looked around the house, the food untouched, that stupid playlist still playing. It was like a scene set up for a different life, one I wasn't living anymore. The message from her was still on my screen, that damn winking face taunting me. An hour later, when she still hadn't replied, I couldn't sit there waiting for her to walk in. I grabbed my keys, got in the car and started driving. And that was when I decided, if she didn't care enough to come home, then I'd make sure she'd come back to something different. I didn't know where I was going at first. Just needed to get out, get some air. But as I drove through the city, I started piecing together a plan. Jenna thought she could just drop a message like that, throw me off and waltz back whenever she wanted? Not this time. By the time I got home, I'd made a decision. I called my sister, told her to keep the kids for a couple more nights. She could hear something in my voice but didn't push. She just said she'd handle it. I went inside, straight to the bedroom, and started packing my things and the kids' essentials. If Jenna wanted to act like she didn't have a family to come home to, fine. I'd give her exactly that. The strangest part was how calm I felt. My hands moved on autopilot, folding clothes, grabbing the kids' favorite stuffed animals, tossing them all into bags. I wasn't thinking about what came next. I was just clearing the space, making room for whatever this night was about to bring. As I was packing, though, I noticed something strange. Her things, the ones that were always carefully laid out on her vanity, were missing. The perfume she wore every day, the fancy makeup she'd started buying recently, and that new black dress I hadn't even seen her wear yet. I checked her side of the closet, and sure enough, a few other things were gone too. I couldn't help but laugh a little, in that bitter, empty way that almost made my own stomach turn. What was she doing? Was this some celebrity she'd been keeping a secret? The thought hit me like a freight train. Maybe this was her new life, and I was just the guy who paid the bills and kept the family going. I grabbed my phone, hands shaking, and dialed her number again, straight to voicemail. I hung up and texted her instead. When are you coming back? Finally, an answer, but not the one I wanted. Don't wait up. It's a fun night, we'll explain tomorrow. We'll explain tomorrow. Just reading those words, I felt my whole body go tense. Explain what? The reality hit me like a gut punch. She wasn't even pretending to cover her tracks. She was throwing it in my face, like I was just some fool sitting around waiting for her story. So I left. I grabbed the bags, threw them in the car, and drove out. No note, no explanation. If she wanted to play these games, she could come back to an empty house and feel exactly what that meant. That I stayed at a hotel that night, barely sleeping. My phone was in my hand, my thumb hovering over the screen, tempted to call her again, to demand answers, to drag her back to reality. But I held back. She was out there, doing whatever she was doing, and I'd given her the space to hang herself with her own choices. Around 7 in the morning, I got a notification. She'd come home. We have a doorbell cam, and it pinged as soon as she stepped through the front door. I watched from my phone, half expecting her to walk in like nothing happened. But her reaction was, well, satisfying. The first thing she noticed was the silence. She paused in the doorway, looking around, her face twitching with confusion. She called out my name, then the kids' names, her voice a mix of hesitation and panic. She walked further inside, and the camera caught her as she went through the house, calling out louder with every empty room. I watched as she checked the living room, the kitchen, then made her way to the bedroom where she must have noticed my side of the closet half empty. Then her phone came out. I didn't pick up when she called. I just watched her from that tiny screen, pacing in our empty bedroom, looking lost. I don't think I'd ever seen her look like that before. Usually she was the one in control, the one who made all the plans and called all the shots. But here she was, standing alone in the middle of her own mess, and I didn't feel even an ounce of sympathy. Finally, after about 5 calls, she left a voicemail, her voice dripping with indignation. "Where are you? Why is the house empty? Call me back right now, this isn't funny." Funny, as if I'd set up some kind of prank to teach her a lesson. This woman was seriously unbelievable. A minute later, another voicemail. "We need to talk. Whatever you think you're doing, you need to come back home. This is ridiculous." I let her stew for a while. She called 3 more times, then sent a string of texts. First, she tried the innocent route. "What's going on? Are you and the kids okay?" When I didn't answer, she switched to angry accusations, acting as if I was the one in the wrong for leaving. Finally, her last message came through, and I knew she was at her breaking point. "If you don't come back and talk this out, don't bother coming back at all." That one made me stop. The sheer audacity of it, like she was trying to spin it on me, like she was the one giving ultimatums now. I almost laughed out loud at how twisted it was. I put the phone down, took a deep breath, and decided it was time. If she wanted a conversation, she'd get one. Just not the one she was expecting. I went back to the house late that morning, steadying myself as I pulled into the driveway. I didn't know what kind of act Jenna was about to put on, but I knew I was done playing the role of her oblivious husband. As I opened the door and stepped inside, I heard her footsteps rushing toward me. She stood in the hallway, arms crossed, looking both relieved and furious. Her hair was a mess, eyes red like she hadn't slept, but any sympathy I might have had was long gone. All I saw was the woman who thought she could walk all over me and never get caught. "You care to explain where you've been?" she snapped, hands on her hips. "And where the kids are?" I held her gaze, calm, watching her squirm just a little. "Why don't you explain first?" I said, voice steady, almost cold. "Where were you last night?" She blinked, surprised I'd turned it around on her, and she let out a dramatic sigh. "I told you I was with a friend. We had a bit too much to drink, so I crashed at her place." She still had the nerve to look me dead in the eye, sticking to the lie without even flinching. But I wasn't buying it. "Oh, really?" I said, raising an eyebrow. "Which friend?" Her eyes darted down, and I knew I had her. "It was Justine," she muttered, and I couldn't help but feel a pang of anger. "Justine?" I repeated slowly, shaking my head. "Funny, because I called Justine this morning. She hasn't seen you in weeks." That hit like a slap. I saw her face shift, her jaw tightening. "So now you're checking up on me?" She forced a laugh, defensive. "What, you don't trust me now?" "Trust you?" I stepped closer, feeling a surge of all the anger I'd held back. "You left your family to spend the night with some guy and told me not to wait up. You're throwing it in my face like I'm some idiot who's just supposed to sit here and take it. So yeah, you could say that trust isn't exactly a word I'd use right now." Her expression cracked just for a second. Then she scoffed, shaking her head as if I was the one being unreasonable. "I can't believe you would do this," she spat, "making me feel like the bad guy here when you just abandoned me last night. What kind of husband pulls a stunt like that?" I couldn't believe what I was hearing. She was twisting everything, doubling down. "Are you serious, Jenna?" I said, voice rising. "You've been lying to me for weeks, and now you're making me out to be the bad guy? Do you even care how all this looks?" She looked away, biting her lip, and then she muttered something under her breath, almost too low to hear. "What was that?" I asked, feeling my pulse pounding in my ears. "Maybe I needed someone who actually appreciates me," she snapped, her eyes flashing as she looked up at me. "Did you ever think of that? You're so busy with work and the kids, you don't even look at me anymore. And you know what? Last night I had fun. More fun than I've had in years." The words hit like a knife to the gut, and for a moment, I couldn't breathe. I realized she wasn't even apologizing. She was admitting it, almost proudly, as if I deserved this, as if she was the one wronged. "So that's it then?" I said, voice low. "You just walk out on your family because you needed a good time? And somehow, this is my fault?" She shrugged, like I was supposed to understand. "Maybe if you'd paid attention, I wouldn't have needed to look somewhere else." That was the moment I knew. This wasn't just some mistake she regretted. This was a choice, and she didn't feel a shred of guilt. She wasn't just trying to cover her tracks. She was trying to make me feel like I'd driven her to it. I took a deep breath, forcing myself to stay calm. "You know what, Jenna? I hope that fun was worth it. Because I'm done." I turned and headed for the door, ignoring her protests, her attempts to call me back. I didn't look back. She could stay there in that empty house with her empty excuses. And for the first time, I felt free. The moment I left the house, I felt a strange, unsettling calm take over me. I drove aimlessly for a while, my mind running through everything that had just happened. Her words replayed in my head on a loop. I needed someone who actually appreciates me. It was like she was taking a hammer to every memory we'd built together, smashing it apart piece by piece. I ended up at a quiet park, one we used to take the kids to on weekends. I sat there on a bench, just breathing, letting the reality sink in. I'd given her the chance to come clean, to show even a hint of remorse. Instead, she'd stood there, practically flaunting it, putting all the blame back on me. Like this whole thing was my fault for not treating her like some kind of queen every second of every day. A notification buzzed on my phone, pulling me out of my thoughts. It was another text from her, trying a different angle this time. "Can we just talk about this? I don't want to throw away everything we have. I know I messed up, but we're bigger than one mistake. Come home, please." One mistake. She was already downplaying it, as if it was some impulsive decision she hadn't been planning for weeks. I didn't respond. I couldn't trust myself to keep it civil. Instead, I stared out at the park, the empty swing set, the faint sound of kids laughing in the distance. All I could think about was what this would do to our own kids, how this whole mess would change everything for them. Then, out of nowhere, my phone buzzed again. But this time, it wasn't her. It was Mike, my friend who'd tipped me off in the first place. I answered, trying to sound normal.
"Hey, man.
"What's up?" He hesitated on the other end, like he didn't know if he should say anything. "Listen, I don't know if this is the right time, but I ran into Jenna last night. She wasn't alone." My stomach tightened, and I gripped the phone harder. "Who was she with?" "I didn't recognize him," he admitted, sounding uneasy. "But they didn't exactly look like they were just friends." I thought I should say something sooner, but I didn't want to jump to conclusions. He didn't need to spell it out. Everything I'd been suspecting, all the hints she tried to brush off, it all lined up too well. Jenna hadn't just been looking for attention. She'd been living this double life right in front of me, daring me to figure it out. "Thanks, man," I muttered, feeling a hollow ache spread through me. "I appreciate it." After we hung up, I sat there for a while, numb. Jenna wasn't just lying. She'd been making a fool out of me in front of people we both knew, and she thought she could just reel me back in with a few apologetic texts. I scrolled through her messages again, my hand hovering over her last one. Part of me wanted to give her a piece of my mind, to make her understand exactly what she'd thrown away. But another part of me knew that whatever I said wouldn't matter. She'd already chosen her path, and I was just the guy left cleaning up the mess. Finally, I typed out a response, short and direct. "Don't worry, I won't be back tonight, or any other night." I hit send, leaned back, and let out a long breath, feeling the weight of that decision settle over me. It was real now, no going back. As soon as I sent that message, I felt like a dam had broken. I'd been holding back so much, trying to make sense of her betrayal, trying to figure out where it had all gone wrong. But now, I knew I was done waiting for answers from her. I needed clarity, and I was going to find it myself. I went back to the house when I knew she'd be at work. I wanted to see if there was any more evidence of what she'd been up to. Maybe I was being paranoid, but I couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't just a one-time thing. If she'd been lying to me for weeks, maybe longer, who knew what else she'd hidden? The house felt different, almost like it wasn't even mine anymore. Every room I walked through, every corner, felt tainted by her lies. In the bedroom, I went straight to her nightstand, something I hadn't done in years. There, tucked away behind a pile of receipts and random junk, I found a small black notebook I'd never seen before. I sat down, flipping it open, my heart pounding as I read. The first few pages were innocent lists, grocery items, a couple of to-do notes. But as I kept reading, it changed. She'd written dates, times, places, and beside some of them, initials. I felt a chill run down my spine as I saw a series of notes labeled B. A pattern so clear I couldn't ignore it. Some entries had details that were impossible to misinterpret. Dinner with B, booked hotel, meet B, downtown. My blood ran cold. She hadn't just been careless. She'd been so bold, writing it all down as if I'd never have the sense to find it. I closed the notebook, feeling a surge of anger that nearly knocked the breath out of me. Every time I'd thought she was working late, every time she'd smiled and brushed me off with some excuse, she'd been meeting this B, and she'd kept a record, right here in our home, like a twisted little diary of everything she'd done behind my back. I barely had time to process it all when my phone rang. It was Jenna. I stared at the screen, debating whether to answer. Finally, I hit accept and kept silent, letting her speak first. She launched right into it, her voice thick with forced sincerity. Listen, I know things got heated, but we really need to talk. This is getting out of hand, and I just want to work things out. Her voice, calm and almost pleading, only fueled my anger. I didn't say a word about the notebook or the evidence I'd found. I wasn't going to give her the satisfaction of knowing I'd uncovered her secrets. Instead, I took a steady breath and kept my voice as cold as I could manage. Jenna, do you think I'm an idiot? She hesitated, caught off guard. What? No, of course not. Why would you even ask that? Because for weeks, you've been lying to me, sneaking around, and now you think a few empty words are going to make it all okay. I paused, letting my words sink in. And you know what? I'm done listening to your excuses. There was silence on her end, and then she finally spoke, her voice suddenly harsh, defensive. I don't know what you're talking about. You're blowing this way out of proportion. Whatever you think you've figured out, it's not what it looks like. The nerve of her, to keep denying it, to act like I was crazy. My grip on the phone tightened as I forced myself to stay calm. Jenna, I found your notebook, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. I know about B. I know exactly what it looks like. Her silence told me everything I needed to know. For a moment, I thought she might try to come up with some excuse, but she didn't. Instead, she just let out a long, defeated sigh. So what now? She finally asked, her tone flat, almost emotionless. It was strange, hearing her sound so hollow, like she'd given up on pretending. But it only made things clearer for me. There was no us left to fix. There was just the truth I'd finally uncovered, and the life I was going to have to rebuild without her. I'll tell you what now, I said, my voice steady. You can start by packing your things, because you're not staying in this house another night. There was a silence so thick I could feel it, like a wall standing between us, made up of every lie, every betrayal she'd wrapped around me. I could almost picture her standing there, gripping the phone, realizing that her well-worn tricks wouldn't work this time. You're kicking me out? She said, almost laughing, a scoff in her voice. You think you can just tell me to leave? This is our house. You lost any right to call this our house the second you decided to turn your back on this family, I said, my voice sharp, unyielding. You think you can waltz back in here after everything? Like I'm just some idiot waiting around? I told you last night. I'm done. She tried to gather herself, but her voice came out thin, weaker than I'd ever heard it. What about the kids? You think you can just push me out and they'll be fine with it? They're going to need their mother. I clenched my jaw, trying to keep my anger in check. You should have thought about the kids before you decided you needed fun with someone else, I said. You made your choice, Jenna, and you sure didn't care about this family then. I could practically hear her scrambling, looking for any way to twist this back on me, but her usual confidence was gone. This was a side of her I'd never seen. A woman caught with nowhere left to turn. I'll get a lawyer if I have to, she spat, that cold edge slipping back into her voice. "You're not going to take this house from me, and you're sure as hell not taking my kids." Her kids. That was the final straw. Hearing her lay claim to the children, as if they hadn't been caught in the middle of her lies, her double life, something snapped in me. "You want to talk about lawyers, fine." I shot back, barely keeping my voice steady. "But if you want to fight me on this, know that I've got every record, every message, and now your own damn notebook. Go ahead, bring a lawyer. Because they'll see exactly who's been tearing this family apart." There was a pause, and for the first time, I heard a trace of something close to fear in her voice. "You wouldn't. This is just a rough patch. People go through things, and you're blowing this way out of proportion." "Out of proportion?" I repeated, almost laughing at the absurdity. "You think I'm blowing this out of proportion? Jenna, you left a trail of lies and kept it right here in this house, under the same roof as your kids, your husband. You really think I'm going to just ignore that?" She went silent, finally understanding that this wasn't some dramatic argument that would blow over, that she couldn't just charm her way back this time. "Look," she said, her voice softening, trying one last angle. "Let's just talk it through, face to face. I'll come home after work, and we can figure this out. Please." But I'd heard enough. I wasn't about to let her walk back in and manipulate her way through another conversation. "Not this time. You come back tonight," I said firmly, "and I'll have your things packed. Take what you need, and after that we'll work out the rest with the lawyers." "Fine," she muttered, her voice barely above a whisper. "If that's what you want." She hung up, leaving me in the silence of the empty house. This time it wasn't a silence that hurt. It was the kind that felt like a clean slate, a long overdue ending. I sat down, taking in the finality of it all. I knew I was facing a storm, that this wouldn't be an easy road. But for the first time in a long time, I felt like I had my feet on solid ground. After the call ended, I sat in silence, letting the weight of everything settle in. The finality of it all, the fact that there was no going back, no turning this into something it wasn't. I thought about the kids, about how I'd break the news to them without destroying their sense of home and family. They deserved the truth, but I'd have to give it to them in pieces, soften the edges so it didn't tear them apart the way Jenna's betrayal had torn me. Then, I stood up, headed to the bedroom, and started packing her things. This time, it wasn't out of rage or desperation. I was ready to take back the life she'd hijacked, piece by piece. I pulled open her drawers and found things I hadn't even noticed before. A new perfume, jewelry I didn't remember buying, fancy lingerie she'd never worn around me. I tossed it all in the suitcase without hesitation, like clearing out clutter from a part of my life that no longer belonged to me. There were little notes tucked between her clothes, messages scrawled in her handwriting with reminders for meetings, but none for the family. Her whole life, this new life she'd carved out, felt like it was wrapped up in those neatly folded clothes and meaningless notes. In her closet, I found more clues to the life she'd been hiding. Expensive heels I'd never seen her wear, designer clothes I hadn't paid for. I threw them in the suitcase, each piece fueling the realization that Jenna had been building a whole other life, right under my nose, with her mind on someone else while I was busy thinking we were a family. Stung, but in a way it made this easier. Every reminder of her betrayal, every little secret, hardened my resolve. At the bottom of her closet, I noticed a small velvet jewelry box. Inside, a necklace with a delicate pendant, a gift I'd given her on our first anniversary. She hadn't worn it in years. I held it for a moment, remembering the person she'd been back then, the person I'd believed in, trusted. But that woman was gone, replaced by someone who could lie with a straight face and blame me for the wreckage. I closed the box and put it in the suitcase. Once I'd packed everything, I set the suitcase by the front door. There was no sign that any of this had ever been a home to her, just a series of rooms she'd drifted through, like a stranger passing through. Then, as I moved back into the living room, I noticed her laptop on the coffee table. I almost left it there, but a thought struck me. Maybe this was my chance to understand just how deep her lies went. Part of me wanted to leave it alone, to walk away without looking back. But the other part, the part that had watched her lie so easily, so casually, needed to know the full truth. I opened the laptop, my hands steady, my mind oddly calm. It was still logged in, her inbox open right there on the screen. The first message in her inbox was from B. The subject line read, "Miss last night already. Can't wait for the next." I clicked it, feeling nothing but cold curiosity. The email was short, casual, like they'd been exchanging these messages for ages. It was clear this wasn't some passing fling. They had a routine, a connection she'd built while she tore down everything we'd built together. The messages went back months. Flirty exchanges, dates set, weekends planned, all while I'd been sitting at home with the kids, believing she was working late or out with friends. It was like reading the script to a play I hadn't even known I was in, a role I'd been cast in as the fool, left to look after the life she no longer wanted. I shut the laptop, feeling a strange sense of closure. She'd made her choices long ago, and nothing I'd said or done would have changed that. All I could do now was protect myself and the kids from any more of her damage. I picked up her suitcase, set it on the porch, and locked the door behind me. In that moment, I felt like I was locking away everything I'd lost. Every lie, every betrayal, every memory that no longer meant what it used to. She could come back for her things, but she wouldn't be coming back for me. Later that evening, I sat by the window, waiting. I didn't know if she'd come tonight or drag it out, hoping I'd cool down and take her back like some naive fool. But my mind was made up, and I needed her to see it. She'd torn apart our life, and now she'd see the full extent of what she'd done. Just after 9, headlights cut through the driveway. I watched as she stepped out, hesitating a moment before she walked up to the porch. When she saw the suitcase sitting outside, her face hardened, a flicker of indignation flashing across it. She took a deep breath and knocked on the door, as if she were some visitor in her own home. I opened it, meeting her gaze with all the calm I could muster. I could see the flicker of something like fear in her eyes as she noticed the coldness in mine. She tried to step inside, but I didn't budge, blocking her path. "What is this?" she asked, her voice low and tense. "You're really going to do this? You're actually locking me out." I glanced at the suitcase beside her, then looked her in the eye. "I told you already, Jenna. You made your choices. Now you're going to live with them." She crossed her arms, her face twisting with irritation. "You're really overreacting. I told you it wasn't serious. Just a distraction. You're blowing this way out of proportion." "Out of proportion?" I repeated, my voice laced with disbelief. "You call this a distraction? Months of sneaking around, meeting up with him, lying to me and the kids. This isn't just some mistake, Jenna. You've been living 2 lives, and I was the idiot sitting here holding everything together while you did it." She rolled her eyes, frustration flashing across her face. "We can work through this if you just let me explain." But I shook my head, cutting her off. "There's nothing left to explain. I saw the emails, Jenna. I saw the plans you made with him, how you talked to him while I was here taking care of everything you abandoned. And now you want to act like I'm the one at fault for overreacting?" She froze, her mouth opening slightly as the realization hit her. She knew I'd seen it all. There was no more pretending, no more excuses left to give. She took a shaky breath, her voice lowering, finally losing the defiant edge. "Look, I was confused. I didn't mean for it to go this far. It just happened. I was unhappy. Okay? Things haven't been the same with us for a long time, and I felt like you didn't care anymore." A bitter laugh escaped me. "So instead of talking to me, instead of working on what was broken, you went looking for appreciation somewhere else? That's how you handled it." She stared at the ground, silent, searching for something to say, but there was nothing left. I could see it on her face, the defeat, the crumbling of her facade. For once, she didn't have the perfect words to spin her way out of this. "Jenna," I said, keeping my voice steady, "you're going to pack up what's left and leave. I don't care where you go, but you're not staying here. I'll handle things with the kids, and I'll tell them whatever I have to make sure they don't get dragged through this any more than they already have been." She looked up, her eyes widening, panic flooding her face. "No, wait, please. They're my kids too. You can't just push me out of their lives." I took a step back, gesturing to the empty doorway. "You already did that yourself, Jenna. I'm just making sure you finally face it." She stared at me, a mix of anger and pleading, but I didn't waver. This wasn't my battle anymore. It was hers to face alone. And for the first time in months, I felt like I could finally let it go, finally step out from the shadow of her betrayal. Without another word, I closed the door, locking it firmly behind me. And for the first time in a long time, the house felt peaceful, like the beginning of something real. The house felt strangely quiet after Jenna left. I stood in the stillness, letting the weight of it settle, knowing that the hardest part was yet to come. I had to face the kids, to somehow explain this chaos in a way that wouldn't shatter their world completely. The next morning, I picked them up from my sister's place. They were full of questions the second they saw me. "Where's Mom?" my daughter asked, her voice carrying that innocent hope only kids have. She was expecting things to be just as they were, the same family she'd gone to bed with the night before. I knelt down, took a deep breath, and tried to summon every ounce of strength I had. "Come sit with me, guys," I said, leading them to the couch. They settled in close, eyes wide, sensing that something was wrong. I wrapped an arm around each of them, gathering my thoughts, trying to find the words. "Mom and we're going through some changes right now," I began, my voice low and steady. "Sometimes, grown-ups have a hard time getting along. And when that happens, they need some time apart to figure things out." My son looked up at me, frowning. "So, Mom's not coming home." I felt a lump in my throat, but I forced myself to hold his gaze. "Mom's going to take some time to figure things out on her own. It doesn't mean she doesn't love you both very much. She loves you more than anything. But right now, it's best for her to be somewhere else for a little while." My daughter clung to my arm, her small hand gripping tighter as she processed what I was saying. Did we do something wrong? Hearing that almost broke me. I took her hand in mine and gave her a gentle squeeze.
"No, sweetheart.
You didn't do anything wrong. This isn't because of you. This is just something between Mom and me. I want you to remember that. Okay?" They nodded, but I could tell they didn't fully understand. How could they? It was an impossible thing to ask them to process. But I kept my tone calm, assuring them that no matter what, they were safe, and they were loved. "We're still a family," I told them, trying to keep my voice steady. "That will never change. And I'm here for you always." We sat there together, the three of us, just holding on to each other. They had questions, some I could answer, some I couldn't. But I promised them that we'd get through this together, that I'd be there every step of the way, no matter what. I could see the worry fading from their faces, a small glimmer of relief replacing it. They were strong, stronger than I could have imagined. And maybe, just maybe, I'd be strong enough to keep us all moving forward. As they drifted off to play, I realized that this was my new reality. A world where I'd be both Mom and Dad, their steady ground, their constant. It was a terrifying thought, but as I watched them, I felt a renewed sense of purpose. Whatever happened next, I'd make sure they had a life filled with love and stability, even if it was different from what I'd once imagined. And in that moment, I knew I'd already made the hardest decision of my life. There was no going back, but there was a way forward, for them, and for me. The days that followed were a strange mix of grief and relief. I'd wake up every morning, expecting to see Jenna's things scattered around the house, expecting to hear her voice drifting in from another room. But instead, there was only quiet, a clean, unbroken silence that felt both foreign and, oddly, comforting. I realized that, without her lies polluting every corner of this home, the air felt lighter, the space my own again. My focus shifted completely to the kids. They were my anchor, pulling me through the hardest moments, giving me purpose and direction. I filled our days with routines, breakfast together, homework help in the evenings, story time before bed. I could see the worry in their eyes fading bit by bit, a little more each day, as they settled into this new life. And the more they healed, the stronger I felt. Jenna tried to reach out a few times, mostly through texts. At first, they were short and accusatory. Frustration at being locked out of her own life. But soon, the tone shifted to regret. She'd send long, rambling messages late at night, laced with apologies, attempts to justify her actions, pleas for a chance to talk. She even tried calling, leaving voicemails that teetered between anger and remorse, like she couldn't quite decide which would bring me back to her. I didn't respond. The door was closed now, and I wasn't about to let her back into the life she'd so easily walked away from. Whatever she felt now was her burden to carry, not mine. My focus was on moving forward, on building a future that would be better and stronger without her lies weighing us down. One afternoon, as I was sorting through some papers in the home office, I came across an old family photo. The four of us on a camping trip a few years back. We were all there, arms around each other, laughing at some forgotten joke, our smiles as wide and open as the sky behind us. I stared at that photo for a long time, feeling the familiar pang of what we once had, what we'd lost, what I'd fought so hard to preserve. But that was the past, a life that no longer existed, and while it hurt to admit it, I was ready to let it go. I put the photo away, filed it in a drawer with the other pieces of our old life, and closed it, knowing I was ready to start something new. I wasn't alone. I had my kids, my friends, the support of everyone who'd stood by me, and I had myself, a little stronger, a little wiser, and a lot more sure of what I wanted. The journey ahead wasn't clear, but it was mine. I was ready to face it, ready to rebuild, to find joy in the small moments, to create a new life on my own terms. And as I sat there, taking it all in, I knew that someday, maybe sooner than I expected, I'd look back at this moment not as the end of something, but as the start of something better. For me and for my kids.